The world, as you're hearing it now, is a hushed echo of its former self. Oceans that once thrashed against shores in thunderous roars now spread out like molten silver, each wave inching forward as if weighed down by time itself. High tides roll in at snail's pace, flooding coastal ruins in a slow, relentless creep waters that lap at skeletal piers where ferries once carried laughter and commerce. The horizon shimmers in perpetual heat haze. The sun hangs low and bloated, its light filtered through a haze of ash and salt, burning the sky into shades of copper and bruised lavender. Inland deserts have claimed cities. Concrete boulevards are fractured into cracked mosaics. Abandoned skyscrapers lean against one another like toppled dominoes. The streets are choked with sand drift, the wind sculpting dunes through shattered storefronts and collapsed overpasses. Where once gleamed neon signs promising endless nights of bright distractions, now hang rusted frames, their bulbs shattered, their messages lost. Even the map you memorized as a child, those neat lines of highways, the swirl of rivers has been rewritten by drought. Riverbeds yaw, wide and bone dry. Reservoirs lie empty, mirror flat expanses of dust where migrating birds come to die. Wildfires rage in the interior, sweeping through what remained of the forests with fanatical hunger. Charred stumps jut from the earth like blackened ribs. The air smells of smoke and scorched pine for hundreds of miles. Storms of ember swirl through the sky, turning daylight into twilight. Rare rainfall arrives in violent bursts, acidic downpours that carve gullies through parched soil, washing away the last remnants of topsoil and leaving communities drowned in mud and ruin. No place is safe from the extremes. Government edifices have long since crumbled. The last broadcast from the Capitol proclaimed martial rule land, then fell silent. In its wake rose ghost town parliaments, scattered enclaves of survivors clinging to fragments of order. Some scrape by behind makeshift barricades of shipping containers and scorched panels of sheet metal. Others roam the wastelands, raiders in patched together armor, preying on the desperate. A handful of scientific outposts hold on solar arrays ringed by sandbags, labs buried in caves where researchers barter data for medicine and batteries. But most institutions have devolved into barter markets and rumor mills, where a whispered word of fresh water or a safe haven is more precious than gold. Survivor groups huddle around dying campfires in the hollows of collapsed tunnels. Their voices rise in prayer, or argument both sound the same under these skies. Children born to a generation that has never known a true spring learn to read the wind and the clouds, hunting for signs of rain between ash-streaked horizons. They carry small journals, pages pressed thin with lists of finding, one canteen of water here, a cache of tinned goods there. Their eyes are old beyond their years. Rogue factions calling themselves the Tide Watchers patrol the flooded flats, scavenging what the ocean leaves behind. Crates of salt-ruined grain, ruined machinery, driftwood carved into crude weapons. They broadcast their own transmissions, warped through static, calling for a return to some forgotten natural order, though no one recalls what that looked like. Other bands, known as the Glass Hammers, sweep the desert ruin fields, smashing every reflective surface they find, convinced that mirrors of the old world summon storms of fire from the sky. Institutions that remain are fragile skeletons. A battered radio station, this one stands on a raised platform of concrete, its generator sputtering like a dying heart. We keep the antenna trained upward, sending out a voice to whoever still tunes in. Occasional replies flicker through, coordinates to a desert oasis. A warning of raider camps ahead, a child's whispered greeting from beneath a bridge. Every breath of wind carries the weight of uncertainty. Will the ocean's slow rise drown another settlement tonight? Will another wildfire erupt in the canyon where we forage for scrap metal? We cannot know. Time itself has grown reluctant. Hear each second dragging behind the next, as though the very fabric of the planet is slipping free from its moorings. And yet, amid the wreckage, small signs of life stubbornly endure. Salt-tolerant reeds sprout along brackish shores. A lone goat grazes on thornbush sprigs near an abandoned farm, and the tide watchers, in some twisted irony, preserve fragments of coral they call sea gardens, hoping one day the seas will heal. This is the world through which I thread my words, a world where oceans slow, but the heartbeats of the living still race with fear, grief, and the glimmer of impossible hope. The collapse has left scars deeper than any canyon, but even here, amid dust and decay, the human spirit refuses to lie quiet. I am Callista Calreas, and this broadcast is the only proof I exist. Before the oceans began to crawl in slow revolt, I was an oceanographer scientist, obsessed with currents and tides, armed with charts and data buoys. I measured the rhythms of the deep, charting the subtle dance between wind and wave. Now I map wreckage and loss. Each morning I pedal this battered generator, coaxing a sputter of power into the antenna above me. My voice carries across the void, threading between radar transmissions, across ghost town airwaves, into the static crackle of a world gone still. I survive by routine and stubbornness. At dawn, before the sun flares its copper glare, I check the cistern 2 barrels of rainwater, filtered through charcoal and sand. I siphon 10 liters into a thermos, heat half over a propane burner, and sip it slowly, savoring its warmth in my chest. Then I gather supplies, a canvas pack, a foldable desalination pump, scavenged from a ruined lab, a handful of nutrient bars that taste of chalk and hope. I lock the door to the shack at the edge of this salt-flooded beach and head out in my solar-recharged dune buggy, its tires half-worn, but still better than walking through the brackish mud. Each day, I drive the same coastal stretch, scanning for signs of life. A figure kneeling to pray at a broken pier, smoke rising from a distant camp, the flicker of a mirror signal across the flooding flats. When I find one, I stop. I don't carry a weapon I rely on my neutrality and my old credentials. Callista Reyes, oceanographer, I announce. I document changes. I share news. I barter water or meds for your story. Some open their doors, some slam them shut. A few let me record their voices on an old field recorder, which I then transmit as voices from the wasteland segments. Why do I keep going? Because if I stop, the broadcast dies, and with it, the faint thread of connection that binds the shattered survivors. In the crackle of my speaker, someone might hear a familiar accent, a name they recognized, and remember they're not truly alone. In my stories, they glimpse a mirror that says, "You're still here. So am I. We persist." That matter-of-fact purpose fuels me through each dawn patrol, through each encounter with grief and fear. I lost my partner, Jay, in the first surge of flooding. We'd been in a coastal research station when the tide crept in overnight, slower than molasses, yet unstoppable. I thought we'd ride it out, sealed the doors, backed water pumps with battery banks. But the tide held more water than our tanks could push back. Seawater seeped in, shorted our processors, and filled the corridors. Jay went down to reset a valve. I called for hours, but the water swallowed her voice. When I finally waded in, at low tide, her pack floated empty in the debris. No recorder, no last message, just her scarf, drifting like a phantom in the standing water. After that, I said nothing for 2 days. The shack fell silent, but for the hum of that generator's engine. Then I realized that in my silence, I left everyone without a voice. So I spoke again, hoarse and trembling, but I spoke. I spoke for Jay, and for all the others whose words were lost beneath the waves. I carry her absence like ballast, keeping me grounded against the tides of despair. At night, I sometimes wake to feel the chill of dread. What if my own voice cuts out? What if the batteries die? What if, one day, no one is left to listen? But dawn always comes, and with it, the ritual. Ignite the propane burner, test the generator, lean into the microphone, and breathe life into the static. I am not just a survivor, I am a witness. I record the subtle halting of time over the oceans, the way currents that once carried ships now carry driftwood and corpses in ghostly procession. I watch dune fields advance like armies of sand, swallowing the last signs of highways. I catalog the faces of children whose laughter sounds ancient, filtered through dust and sorrow. And I gather their stories like precious drift seeds, scattering them back into the ether, in hopes they will find fertile hearts somewhere beyond these ruins. The weight of loss is constant, but so is a shimmering ember of resilience. I remind myself daily, the tides slowed, but they did not stop. The ember burns, even under a blanket of ash. The human spark endures, even when everything familiar has vanished beneath brine and dust. What keeps me tethered is responsibility. I once measured the health of oceans. Now I measure the health of humanity's spirit. Every time a new voice cracks into my broadcast, we're at Old Harbor Dock. Waters clear. I adjust my course, pedal harder, risk another sandstorm, another band of raiders. Because without that transfer of information, we drift farther, apart, and in a world fractured by disaster, distance kills faster than thirst. I carry mementos of the world before. A small vial of deep-sea water I took from the Mariana Trench Lab, labeled before. A faded photograph of Jay standing on the deck of our research vessel, smiling despite the gathering storm clouds. A pressed leaf inked with salt crystals from a mangrove that once stood at the shoreline where this shack now perches. Each item is a testament to what was and to what might still be reclaimed if hope holds. So here I stand, a lone voice in the dawn, broadcasting across slowed oceans and scorched deserts. I tell of survivor enclaves scavenging solar panels too, power microfarms. I warn of raider convoys heading inland along old shipping lanes. I share rumors of a buried aquifer beneath the highlands, perhaps a myth, perhaps the salvation of thousands. I detail my own scars, a gash in my thigh from tangled wreckage, the memory of Jay's laughter under starless skies. But above all, I share what remains evergreen, our will to endure. I have no mandate, no fleet of ships, no army of scientists at my beconly, this battered shack, its sputtering generator, and my steadfast pulse-holding cadence with each crackle of the airwaves. I broadcast because I must. For every listener who tunes in, I carry their name with reverence. For every story shared, I etch another chapter in our collective chronicle. I am Callista, Rhea Oceanographer turned storyteller, survivor turned witness, voice turned lifeline. And until the seas reclaim these shores entirely, until the last ember cools into ash, I will keep to con, because as long as I speak, there remains a record of USA promise that even as time slows down over the oceans, we still move forward. I tune the microphone and exhale into the static. Today's report carries a weight heavier than any before, because the crisis I've been tracking has crossed into a new, more lethal phase. The oceans aren't merely crawling, they're convulsing with energy we can no longer predict. The great slow currents that once carried nutrients, regulated temperature, and supported life have fractured into erratic eddies. Beneath the surface, water temperatures have risen by an average of 4 degrees Celsius in just 5 years, so fast that deep-sea thermoclines have collapsed. Marine ecosystems collapsed first, the corals bleaching and dissolving, plankton blooms turning into toxic mats that suffocate what little fish remain. On land, the fallout ripples outward. Every morning, I ride the dune buggy along transformed shorelines and record the data. Air temperatures peaking at 52 degrees Celsius under the copper sky. Barometric readings swinging wildly by 20 millibars in minutes. Humidity plummeting to single digits. Yesterday's reading at Old Harbor Dock showed a near instantaneous pressure-dropping atmospheric bomb. The scientists called it before their stations went silent, triggering rogue microstorms that ripped through the mangrove ruins. These storms form without warning, walls of wind 7 meters high, driven by the ocean's kinetic tantrum, carrying saltwater spray inland like corrosive acid. I sketched out the mechanics on an old whiteboard before I left the shack surface. Heating the sun's rays, filtered through ash, but blazed hotter, heat the top 2 meters of the ocean disproportionately. Thermaline disruptions, salinity gradients break down as ice melt from polar caps floods the North Atlantic, reducing water density and stalling the Gulf Stream. Jet stream collapse with the planet's heat redistributed unpredictably. The polar jet oscillates, plunging Arctic air into temperate zones and allowing torrid tropical air to surge north. Localized superstorms where these air masses collide over the slow-moving currents. They spawn cyclonic walls that hover in place, cycling salt water and sand in lethal spirals. I send that explanation over the airwaves, hoping someone, somewhere, can use it to buttress their shelters or plan a safe route, because it's not mere theory anymore. It's stalking our communities like a predator, honing in on prey. Today's patrol brought me into direct conflict with this new reality. I'd heard word from the tide watchers that a salt storm was building offshore, an aberration even by their apocalyptic standards. By mid-morning, I felt the first off-gassing, a faint hiss of salt vapor, like steam rising from a steel plate. By noon, the horizon boiled white, and I had to abandon the buggy when the winds picked up. I crouched behind a collapsed warehouse wall, my water thermos strapped to my belt, as 20-meter waves of grit slammed into the structure like battering rams. The roar was deafening, an iron wind that tore at my skin and drew salt crystals into my lungs. It was here I encountered Mara and her group of scavengers. They'd holed up in a flooded freight container, hollowed out to form a makeshift shelter. Their eyes glowed with panic and relief when they saw me. They risked venturing into the storm for one thing: a rumor of a desalination unit buried under the dunes, a relic from a research station that held the promise of pure water. They invited me in, pressing me to help navigate the dunes once the storm abated. I agreed. Their fear sharpened my own. Our arrival at the crest of the dune was a tableau of surreal devastation. The storm had carved spiral trenches into the sand, each swirl half a meter deep, as though the wind itself had gouged the earth. We found the unit lodged in a collapsed research dome, half buried, hoses shredded, but the core intact. Mara rigged primitive filters from torn canvas and duct tape. I guided her through calibrating the pressure valves. When water dribbled out clear and cold against our parched throats, the group cheered like lost souls sighting salvation. Yet as dusk fell, a new threat emerged. The temperature plummeted, a side effect of the storm's interaction with cold subsurface currents. Within an hour, hypothermia set in. Mara's son, Tarek, began shivering uncontrollably. We had no insulated clothing left, only the thin jackets scavenged from abandoned vehicles. I burned fuel in a makeshift stove, brewed a slurry of powdered soup and hot water, wrapped him in a solar blanket. By morning, his fever broke, but the rarity of warmth in this world struck me anew. We had undone the balance of heat and cold, the extremes spinning out of control. Survival has grown harder with each sunrise. Water sources demand ever more ingenuity. Collecting dew with canvas sheets at dawn, siphoning brackish water through charcoal beds, excavating silent aquifers beneath coastal cliffs. Food is a constant gamble. Yesterday's find was a cluster of salt-tolerant tubers near an otherwise dead wetland, but half were hollowed out by larvae, and the other half nearly tasteless. Fuel for heat and cooking is nearly impossible. I barter antibiotic tablets for two-stroke engine oil, rationing it to run the generator for no more than an hour a day. After that, I pedal the manual generator, my legs aching from the effort. Armed with makeshift harpoons and flamethrowers, they target anything that moves, especially those towing desalination rigs or carrying water barrels. Last week, I abandoned a convoy when the horizon glimmered with searchlights. I hid under a corroded tanker trailer. They tore out the plant, broke it apart, and dumped its components into the sea. Sometimes I broadcast warnings, heading south along Mermaid Spine, unarmed convoy. 10 wheels, hoping friendly groups can steer clear. But transmissions travel far and often end up drawing more predators. Our resources skew scarcity. Water consumption is down to 2 liters per person per day. Food runs on the same meager scale: 20 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbohydrate, pre-packaged nutrient bars designed for emergencies. Fuel is so scarce that most survivors resort to bio-waste, furnaces burning waste, biomass in sealed chambers to distill heat. These produce toxic byproducts, but desperate lungs choke it down. The shell of civilization persists only where small communities can carve out a margin. Solar panels wired in series, rooftop gardens irrigated by gray water, wind turbines jury-rigged from disused propeller blades. I include these survival tactics in my broadcast, step-by-step instructions for constructing sand filter water traps, diagrams for converting old refrigerators into root cellar coolers, solar still designs that can yield up to half a liter of distilled water per day in optimal conditions. My scientific background helps me translate triage into technique. I cite the Boyle-Marriott principle when explaining atmospheric distillation, reference Darcy's law when teaching survivors to locate subsurface aquifers, even recite snippets of heat transfer equations to justify insulation strategies. But the cold truth remains. Knowledge may save some, but not all. Every message ends with urgency. Don't wait for the next salt storm, I warn. Build your barriers now. Reinforce your shelters. Identify backup water sources and share coordinates over multiple channels. And still, when I wake at dawn, new crises await. A solar flare that crippled satellite communications, a killer heat wave fusing asphalt into ridged glass, a rumor of a mass migration from the northern highlands. Survival isn't passive. It's a continuous cycle of detect, adapt, and flee. In the shifting light of a new dawn, I set out, again tracing the fingerprint of this global crisis. I measure salinity spikes in tidal pools, record barometric anomalies in the shifting jet stream, test particulate density in the choking air. Each data point feeds into my nightly summary. Today, 28 new microstorms formed along the Silver Coast. Temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius. Water rationing hit new lows. I broadcasted across the waves, hoping someone, somewhere, can calibrate their defenses to one more disturbing variable, because this is the primary crisis, not just a single event, but a cascade of runaway feedback loops. Ice melt floods interfere with currents, which spur storm formation, which devastate land-based water systems, which drive desperate migrations, which spark conflicts over dwindling resources. And at the heart of it all, time itself. Its feet over the ocean slowed by unknown forces, but still carrying the lethal momentum of a planet out of balance. The stakes are not theoretical. This crisis is what makes each sunrise a gamble. Will my solar panels produce enough charge? Will the dunes shift, burying the pump? Will the raiders once more tear the life-giving apparatus from my hands? Or will I find, at the edge of the storm, another band of survivors desperate for water and willing to trade diff only for a moment hostility for humanity? I end tonight's dispatch with a plea: track the microstorm patterns on your barometers. Keep extra charcoal and gauze for filters. Share your innovations freely hour. Only currency now is knowledge. And when the salt winds howl, remember this: we are not powerless. We adapt, we endure, we survive. Then I let the static fill the silence. Outside, the dunes settle under a fragile moon. I stare at the data readings flickering on my cracked screen, and I know tomorrow will bring another chapter of this unfolding catastrophe. Yet I'll pedal the generator again. I'll load my pack again. I'll speak into the void again. Because in this world broken by runaway climate collapse, our only hope lies in understanding the crisis and Then, acting on that knowledge with relentless ingenuity, I tighten the straps on my pack and scan the horizon and endless sweep of cracked dunes and rusted pylons, the skeletal remains of highways that once carried life. My water reserves are down to 12 liters. Food rations, once meant to last a month, are dwindling into mere crumbs. 3 nutrient bars this morning, 2 for tonight, and then nothing but scavenged roots and whatever I coax from my solar still. Fuel for the generator sits at a single liter of 2-stroke oil. I've rationed it to last 3 days of emergency broadcasts. After that, I'll rely entirely on pedaling the crank generator, my legs against the dying planet. I press the on-air button and speak into the mic. My voice steady, despite the knot in my gut. Dawn report. Water reserves at 50%. Food, 30%. Fuel, 20%. Temperatures rising forecast. Peak of 51 degrees Celsius possible microstorm formation along eastern shoreline. All survivor groups share coordinates if you have new water caches. Static crackles, then fades. No replies. The silence feels heavier than any response. I begin my patrol in the dune buggy, each bump jolting me with the memory of better days. The landscape quivers in heat haze. Mirages dance around hollowed cargo ships, half submerged in dunes. I pass the husks of tilted windmills, our last nod to green energy now frozen in place, their blades splintered by sandstorms. The horizon, once a promise of limitless possibilities, has narrowed to an inescapable sentence. By midday, the sun beats down like a relentless drum. I park beneath the rusted frame of an old overpass. My water thermos rattles against my thigh, thankfully. Still half full, I take a long drink, savoring each cool drop. The dunes have shifted again overnight. What was a gentle dip at this spot is now a 6-meter rise, forcing me to dig through loose sand to reach the air vent of the old storm drain I use as shelter. Inside, the walls glisten with condensation droplets, tiny miracles of microclimates. Amid the desert furnace, I collect what I can. A few milliliters of water dripping from rusted ductwork. A handful of scavenged metallic scrap bolts and circuit boards I'll trade later. The underpass smells of stale humidity, a reminder that life can persist in hidden crevices. But even this oasis is fragile. I estimate the drip rate at 20 milliliters per hour, which translates to less than half a liter per day if I seal every crack. Not enough to keep 2 people alive, but sufficient for one if I ration carefully. My solitude shatters at the approach of engines, the glass hammers. I hear their signature roar before I see them from modified dirt bikes, their riders wearing mirrored shards of broken solar panels as armor, helmets glinting like fractured diamonds. They descend upon the overpass with practiced brutality, guns trained to intercept any sign of water traps or hidden caches. I grip my diesel pump like a weapon and step from the drain's mouth. The nearest rider, his mask etched with red stripes. Reyes, hand over the water gear. We know you stashed filters here. I steal my breath. Recall the ration log I broadcast this morning. I have only one desalination filter left. If they take it, hours of my work vanish into chaos. I stumble. Backward, raising my hands. There's nothing here but rust and dust, I rasp. I've got 2 liters in my pack. Take it and be gone. The leader kicks at the ductwork. sending a spray of droplets across the concrete. The other riders circle me, crouching low. Their mirrored armor throws stray beams of sunlight into my face, disorienting me. But then something unexpected. The leader hesitates, helmet nodding, toward the mouth of the storm drain. Behind him, through the haze of heat, something shifts. A figure slides down the embankment. A woman draped in tattered blue cloth, a makeshift cloak of dyed canvas that once covered a shipping crate. She holds a small wooden box aloft. The glasshammer leader glances at her, uncertainty flickering in his stance. "That's mine," she says, voice low but firm. "Water distiller. I found it down by the reef wreck. It's calibrated for brackish water." She lifts the box, its hinges battered but intact. "You want it? Come get it." They lower their guns at the same instant that my heart stutters. In the world we inhabit, water tools are like mythical artifacts, worth more than groupies of raiders or banded guns. She steps forward, and I recognize her from the broadcasts. Bryn of Tide's Edge. She's rumored to command a flotilla of solar skiff rafts along the slower currents, elusive leader who trades water for supplies, but vanishes when conflict spikes. The glasshammers grunt, unsure whether to seize the box or the moment. Bryn doesn't hesitate. She unscrews the latch with a practiced twist and hands the box to me. "You need it more," she says quietly, then turns on her heel and vanishes back up the embankment. The glasshammers roar after her, but the dunes swallow her silhouette. Before their bikes even turn, I stand there, trembling, the distiller box heavy in my hands. When I look up, the glasshammer leader is gone, his riders trailing behind him. A shard of mercy, or perhaps sheer confusion, held them back. My pulse races both with relief and with something darker. Why did Bryn risk herself? And why did the glasshammers retreat? My solitude, it seems, has been cracked open. This encounter ignites a spark, a myth turned living proof. Bryn is real. Her flotilla might offer more than isolated caches. It could be the network we need. A community not bound by scavenging ruins, but moving with the tides themselves, carrying water where it's needed. But the promise cuts both ways. In a world hungry for resources, trusting others is a gamble with death. I'm not naive. The Tide Watchers once ambushed me, claiming I broadcasted false coordinates to draw them into ambushes. I've seen alliances splinter into firefights within hours, yet something in Bryn's gesture feels genuine. The water distiller in my hands is proof, tangible as sweat on my brow. I pack the box into my canvas bag and pedal the buggy toward my shack, the dunes rolling like a restless sea. My mind churns with questions. Can I trust Bryn? Are her flotilla's intentions pure, or is this another trap? How many more secrets hide beneath the dunes, waiting for someone desperate enough to risk life and limb? Night falls, and with it, the desert's two-sided chill. I build a fire in a rusted oil drum-burning insulation from an abandoned office to produce heat. The generator sits silent. I owe it a day's rest after last night's emergency broadcast. I unwrap the wooden distiller box and examine its gears, ceramic plates, copper coils, glass tubing on, elegant cross between maritime engineering and alchemy. I map its design on my whiteboard. If I can replicate a few components with scavenged copper wiring and shards of glass, I could build 2 or 3 more units. I sketch plans for a production line, salvage corroded heat exchangers, melt down wiring into coils, cast ceramic plates from kill dust and clay. But resources bite back. I only have fragments of copper tubing from a condemned desalination plant. Not enough to build even one more unit. The ceramic plates once pulverized for insulation are gone in order to replicate Brin's design. I'll need materials I've never seen outside the Highland research stations. Medical-grade ceramics, borosilicate glass, platinum wiring, all precious ingredients now locked behind impassable dunes or controlled by raider enclaves. I stare at the plans, frustration coiling in my chest. Then I remember those whispers, rumors of a floating workshop on the slow Currentsa repurposed oil tanker, rigged with solar arrays and a 3D printer powered by wind turbines. They call it the Arkwright, a nomadic fabrication lab where survivors converge to build the tools to rebuild. No one's ever seen it, just grainy photos shared across encrypted frequencies. Some say it's a myth, a story mothers tell their children to keep them from losing hope. Others swear they've docked against its hull and tasted fresh-baked bread made from hydroponic weight. I lean back, the embers of the fire casting wavering shadows. Could the Arkwright be real? If so, its workshop could produce the parts too, replicate Brin's distillers, amplify our survival capacity tenfold. It could be the key to transforming isolated pockets of life into a cohesive network. But to find it, I'd have to navigate the shifting currents, dodge raider patrols, traverse desert dunes and salt flats, and trust in rumors. Tomorrow, I'll decide. Do I follow this fragment of a legend to risk my life chasing a phantom workshop, or do I cling to the fragments I know I can control? The morrow's choice will shape the next chapter of my story, and perhaps the story of all who cling to life under these copper skies as I extinguish the fire and settle onto a makeshift cot. My mind races with possibilities and dangers. Sleep comes fitfully, every breeze outside whispering of yet another crisis-rising winds, fractured alliances, dwindling supplies. I drift between dreams of tidal waves, slowing to a crawl, and waking nightmares of empty water barrels. In the half-dream, State Brin's voice echoes, you need it more. When dawn breaks, I'll pedal the generator, broadcast my ration report, and set out again this time. Not just to survive, but to seek the Arkwright. I'll trace every whisper in my database, ping every survivor enclave with the coordinates I've gathered, and hope that in the end, the myth outlives the skepticism. Because in a world where water is worth more than gold, and trust can be a death sentence, myths are the seeds from which hope and perhaps salvation can grow. Tomorrow, I chase a legend, and in doing so, I stake everything on the slender thread of trust, the warninng Sorona, half-remembered relic from before screeches to life in my mind as the horizon darkens. I'm perched on the prow of the dune buggy, legs braced against the dashboard, heart pounding like a war drum. Behind me, the spindly silhouette of the old pier juts into roiling gray water. Ahead, the desert flares red in the dying light. I've come here chasing the Arkwright's ghost coordinates, following whispers of a nomadic workshop moored somewhere beyond the Silver Coast. Now the sky itself seems to mock me, cracked and bleeding, peeling away in layers of violent pink and sulphurous green. I glance down at my wrist-worn barometer, pressure falling at an impossible rate. My handheld weather monitor chirps an alarm. Microstorm cell formation detected at 12 kilometers out, moving in fast. Behind it, a second cell larger, hungrier, already bearing down on our makeshift harbor. The two are set to merge, creating a superstorm that could flatten the pier and drown the dunes. If I don't find shelter and fast, this entire stretch of coastline will vanish in a cataclysmic surge of water, sand, and salt. I kill the engine, jump down, and sprint toward the skeletal carcass of a sunken freighter, half buried at the water's edge. Its hull protrudes at a sharp angle, offering the only real cover I've seen for miles. I heave open a side hatch and scramble inside, coughing as grit and salt spray skid along the metal. The cargo hold is cavernous and dark, just the kind of place to wait out the storm, if I can secure it. I press my Dessel pump and a handful of water pouches into my pack, tighten the strap, and steel my lungs for the torrent to come. Outside, the wind rises to a shriek, and the first wall of salt rain slams the freighter's flanks like a battering ram. The metal creaks and groans as the ship shifts in the churning shallows. I wedge a length of rusted pipe into the hatch, frame my only barrier against the storms. Full force. Then I turn to the back of the hold and press my ear to the hull, feeling the vibration of the world tearing itself apart. They arrive at once, the Tide Watchers, in 3 battered solar skiffs, skimming the slow current like phantoms. I recognized their flags, from old broadcasts a tattered wave emblem in sunset orange. Bryn stands at the bow of the largest skiff, silhouetted against the lightning-laced clouds, her cloak whipping behind her like a battle standard. She lifts a hand and calls out, her voice magnified by some hidden speaker. "Cal, we came for the Arkwright coordinates, but we'll take shelter here, too. Help us in." I hesitate. Every instinct screams to lock the hatch and ride out the storm. Alone human contact is a risk I can't afford. But then I remember Jay, her laughter in the station corridors before the flood. The way trust once meant something more than a currency for barter. I heave the pipe free, fling open the hatch, and shout, "Come on, hurry." They spill in behind me, for Tide Watchers in patched wetsuits, hauling tool crates and bundles of wiring. Bryn enters last, her eyes flicking to the pipe in my hand. "Thanks," she says, voice calm. Then she waves her team into the deeper recesses of the hold. "We've got parts for a 3D printer here, Cal. Enough raw polymer resin to run. For 40 hours, model nozzles for heat exchangers, even a spool of platinum wire." My breath sticks in my throat. "You actually found them." She nods, brushing grit from her hair. On the Arkwright's drift, logs turns out, it never left these waters. It moves with the Gulf Stream. We tracked its wash patterns and caught up to it at dawn. Before I can respond, the freighter shudders violently. A thunderous crack echoes from above. The hull's canopy is splitting under the storm's assault. Salt geysers erupt through the breach, spraying the hold in cold. Stinging sheets. We scramble for a corner, wrapping ourselves in wind blankets and sealing eyes and mouths against the airborne brine. Lightning arcs across the sky, illuminating the battered machinery stacked around us. Spare solar cells, pressure pumps, control modules, the very parts I need to replicate. Bryn's distillers. My heart hammers. This is the crucible moment. I can choose to flee alone with my life, leaving them to drown in this metal tomb, or I can stand here and share what I have, forging the first true alliance in years. The wind roars, shrieking like a living thing. I clutch the resin canister Bryn offered, its label flaking away. If you help me build the distillers, I'll share the specs for the 3D printer end. Together we can mass produce them. We'll seed the coast with units. We can rebuild. My voice cracks on the last word. Bryn's gaze is fierce. And what of the glass hammers? They know the specs now. They'll hunt us across every dune. I can broadcast false coordinates. I say draw them away. Use the microstorm as cover. We make them chase ghosts. She holds my gaze, then nods once, then let's build. We wedge the crates into a corner and clear a workspace around a stack of wooden pallets. Bryn's team lights a low-burn forge from salvaged insulation, foam, and oil, the only fuel they could spare. Sparks fly as they weld iron braces to secure the pallets as a table. I unpack the polymer resin and platinum wire, my fingers trembling with adrenaline. The wind's howls drown out all other noise. I'm acutely aware of every heartbeat, every ragged breath. The hold rattles as a monstrous gust tears loose a section of the railing above us. A chunk of metal crashes nearby, showering us with salt shards. I leap back, my shoulder grazing a pipe that hisses Steeman, internal breach in the freighter's condenser system. The unit hisses, the entire hold filling with corrosive vapor. I grab Bryn's arm. She twists and frees a roll of insulating tape from her pack. Together, we wrap the pipe, layering thick strips until the hiss dwindles to a sputter. My lungs burn, but the vapor recedes. We collapse against a crate, gasping. Bryn's eyes glint in the lantern light. You're a scientist, she says. You lead. I stand, unsteady, but resolute. Okay. Step 1, assemble the printhead. Step 2, load resin. Step 3, run the calibration. My voice steadies as I bark orders. Milo, fetch the nozzle array in crate 3. Lonnie, set up the power regulator. Bryn, help me mount the guide rails. We work in a frenzy, each member of the team moving in synchronia, makeshift family forged in chaos. The resin melts into the heated chamber. The platinum wire coils into the laser guide assembly. I route the wiring harness along the pallets, secure it with cable ties scavenged from an old generator. The howling wind becomes a drum roll in my ears. Then, as the final circuit clicks into place, a calamitous roar shakes the freighter. The storm's eye is overhead, a swirling vortex of salt spray and razor sand, its sheer size dwarfing the hold. I stagger but refuse to break. Bryn presses a hand to my shoulder. This is Itar. You ready? I swallow, nod. We've come this far. She flips the switch. The printer whirs to life, motors humming, optics glowing. In the center of our makeshift table, the print bed descends, and a single droplet of resin pools. The laser cleaves it into a perfect discs, the first ceramic heat exchanger plate of our new distiller. Cheers erupt in the hold, but they're cut short as the vessel groans again. A final, thunderous crack above us. The bulkhead gives way. A wall of salt rain floods the hold in a blinding deluge, drenching us from head to toe. The lantern sputters, and I fear the forge has extinguished, but the wind inside the hold collapses. In on itself, then recedes as quickly as it arrived. We stare in stunned silence. We survived the storm's heart. Bryn wipes salt from her goggles and laughs a raw, joyous sound. Milo plunges a hand into the resin vat, gestures wildly. We did it. We survived. I exhale, my voice hoarse. We live. And in that moment, as the storm abates and a single beam of sickly sunlight pierces the hold, I understand. This is our turning point. We have moved from isolated survivors, eking out fragile existences, to architects of something greater. With the printer's hum echoing around us, each plate we craft, each distiller we assemble, becomes a beacon proof that hope can be engineered, that resilience can be scaled. I glance at Bryn, her expression softening. What now? I ask. She steps closer, eyes bright with determination. We finish the build. Then we bring the Arkwright here. We forge an alliance of flotilla and desert sea and sandso. No storm, no raider, no dying tide can extinguish what we've ignited. I nod, my heart swelling. Outside, the wind has fallen away, leaving a cold hush. Waves lap gently against the hull, slow, deliberate, like time itself resuming its rhythm. In the silent aftermath, I realize this is more than survival. This is our chance to reshape the world. I crouch beside the printer and lay a hand on its steaming frame. Let's rebuild, I whisper, and with that vow, we set to work igniting the spark that will rekindle life along the weakened coasts and beyond into the parched deserts. The storm has passed. The turning point is upon us, and in the fragile light of this battered freighter, we begin to build a new tomorrow. When the sun peaked over the fractured horizon the next morning, it found a different world than the one it left. The freighter's hold, once a storm-scarred tomb, had become a workshop humming with purpose. Around me stood Bryn's Tide Watchers and my makeshift team, faces lit by the soft glow of freshly printed distiller plates. On pallets and crates, disassembled components lay in neat rows: ceramic heat exchangers, copper coils, glass tubing, every piece essential for the units we would scatter along the coast and into inland enclaves. We emerged onto the deck, blinking against the brittle dawn light. The sea, slowed but not stilled, rippled beneath us in muted silver swells. Dunes lined the beach far below, still pocked with the scars of last night's superstorm. Yet here, on this battered hull, something fundamental had shifted. Instead of scavengers trudging under the relentless sun, we were builders, life-givers, wielding technology as our weapon against collapse. By midday, we had completed 3 fully operational distillers. Bryn activated the first one. Seawater pumped through charred canvas pre-filters dripped into the chamber, heated by a small solar array panel. Out of its spout flowed clear, desalinated water, precise, cool, pure. We tasted it in unison, tears of exhaustion and relief stinging our eyes. Each bottle we filled represented hours of collective labor and every hard-won scrap of material. Mara, who had lost her son in the early salt storms, pressed a palm to the distiller's spout and whispered, "We live." The words, barely audible, carried more weight than any broadcast I'd ever sent. In that moment, hope was no longer abstract. It was the water trickling into our cupped hands, the steady whir of the printer still echoing in the hold, and the shared determination etched on every face around me. Hope had come, but it was fragile. Already, we faced logistical challenges, how to transport dozens, hundreds of these distillers across hundreds of miles of desert and dune, how to protect them from raiders like the glasshammers who would stop at nothing to seize our miracles. And even if we delivered the units, could scattered enclaves maintain them without the precision engineering we had here on the Arkwright? Still, as Bryn charted a course northward, towing to distillers on her lead skiff and another on my dune, buggy's trailer, I felt a tremor of something profound, possibility. The tide slowed, sea was our highway, and the dunes our crossroads. We would seed coastlines and shelters, perhaps linking dozens of communities into a network of self-sufficient oases. Word of the Arkwright could draw allies, and if we RADIO linked enclaves, we could coordinate protection and share repair techniques. In the weeks that followed, I saw the transformation in myself more clearly than in any broadcast log. The Callista Reyes, who once wandered the wastelands alone, clutching ration logs and haunted by Jay's disappearance, had become something else, a leader of builders, a voice not just reporting loss, but shepherding reconstruction. The fear that whispered I was powerless had been drowned by the roar of the printer, by the sense that each component we produced was a defiance of entropy. Yet I could not pretend the journey was without scars. Nights still brought haunting dreams of salt storms swallowing us whole, of turbines cracking under the wind's rage, of the glass hammers descending with torches and steel. Each dawn, I pressed my palm against the control console of the Arkwrights, communications array keyed into multiple survivor frequencies, and reminded myself, fear can guide caution, but it must not paralyze purpose. I thought of Jay often, her last data logs filled with precise measurements of thermocline shifts. I imagined her smiling as the distillers came online, a final act of her oceanographer's spirit carried through me. In my mind, I whispered gratitude for her sacrifice and for the hard-won knowledge that made every plate we printed a testament to human ingenuity. Outside our floating workshop, the environment writhed between ruin and renewal. The dunes, wind-scarred and shifting, still threatened to swallow solar arrays. Yet, in sheltered coves behind steel breakwaters, I watched mangrove saplings push through mud once coated in toxic bloom. Tidal flats trapped by detritus revealed crustaceans scuttling in shallow pools. In the distance, I spotted salt-tolerant reeds waving against the windproof that life persisted wherever we eased its path. Yet the global patterns remained, grim satellite uplinks from allied research stations, miraculously back online after repairs from the Arkwrights. Technicians reported new microstorm clusters forming near the equator, drought deepening across the highlands and ocean, heat anomalies intensifying. The battle was far from won. The planet was rebalancing itself violently, and we were but fledglings in its crosswinds. Every broadcast I sent now combined narrative with data coordinates for distiller drops, instructions for maintenance, but also reflections on what we'd achieved. I spoke of Mara's renewed laughter as her community's cistern filled for the first time in months. I described the marvel of the Arkwrights, thrumming build bays, forging not weapons, but the blueprints of survival. And I confessed the gnawing worry that radar marks on the map hinted at an impending backlash. Glasshammer enclaves, enraged at losing their grip on water supplies, might launch coordinated raids to crush the flotilla. through these updates, I learned that hope had to be anchored in honesty. Despair lurked in any omission. Only by sharing our vulnerabilities alongside our victories could I galvanize trust across the wasteland. I encouraged communities to form defense circles volunteer, patrols armed with improvised shields and nets to protect distiller stations. I pushed tactics for camouflaging our build's painting units in sand tones to blend with dunes, or floating them behind kelp rafts to disguise their profiles. One evening, after a marathon of transmissions and production runs, I slipped away. From the humming heart of the Arkwright to its aft deck, beneath a bruise-purple twilight sky, I stared at the slowing sea. Time over the oceans had almost returned to its former cadence, here no longer molasses thick, but still burdened by heat and turbulence. I cradled a vial of desalinated water, lifted it to my lips, and let the coolness wash through me. I thought of every soul who would taste this same water, a child in a desert cave, a fisherman stranded on a leveled pier, an elder who'd given up counting seasons. I wondered whether, years from now, someone would stand at this same rail and taste the freedom in every drop, remembering how it all began in a battered freighter's hold. I allowed myself a brief smile, small but real. The world remained fractured, its scars deep and heedless of our efforts. But in that silent moment, with the Arkwright gently drifting on patient tides, I understood the truth of our plight. We cannot wait for the planet to heal itself. We must become its stewards, its builders, its bold experimenters. And in doing so, we give nature the chance to follow our lead. As I rejoined Bryn and the crew, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Tomorrow, she said, we move inland. The Whispering Canyons have aquifer springs rumor says they've remained untapped. We'll seed those villages next. I nodded, resolve solidifying like concrete in my chest. The Arkwright's workshops would churn out dozens more distillers. Our broadcasts would spread the coordinates. Allied enclaves would rise up in defense. The battle for survival was entering its next phase, not mere endurance, but resurgence. I lifted my vial, offered a silent toast to the half-broken sun, to life. I whispered, and for the first time in years, that felt like more than a prayer. It was a promise. I don't know what tomorrow holds. The Arkwright drifts now on a current too slow for its bulk, its hull patched and humming, yet battered by more storms than it can count. Behind us lie the makeshift oases we seeded, coastal villages humming. As their new distillers purifying brackish water, desert enclaves revived by hidden springs and solar stills echoing the beat of my broadcasts. Ahead lies the Whispering Canyons, their aquifer veins whispered about in wary tones, the next test of our fragile alliance between sea and sand. Hope is fragile here. Each distiller we install is a triumph against entropy. Yet every unit can be stolen, sabotaged, or simply degraded by the salt-laden winds. Every village we touch could slip back into thirst. Every community that cheers our arrival could just as swiftly turn on us in fear or desperation. I've seen children clutch the crystal water droplets as if they were diamonds. I've seen elders bow with tears, praising what they once called miracles. And I've seen raiders pry open these machines with crude tools, ripping out coils and shattering plates. The same ingenuity that saves us is the same that can unravel us. Still, we press on. In the cold dawn, I pedal the manual generator to feed the transmitter. My voice cracks at first, an honest admission that even I am weary, that my shoulders ache under the weight of every life that listens in. Then, as the rhythm steadies, I speak of new breakthroughs, a hybrid solar wind charger that Mara's team prototyped in the Canyon workshop, a clay-based filter medium that grows stronger the more you use it, and an experimental crop of salt-tolerant barley that promises enough grain for simmering stews rather than chalky gruel. These small victories, each a flicker against the vast Darkar. What? I commit to air. I remind the listeners that survival is not a destination, but a ritual, rising before dawn to harvest dew, tending micro-gardens at the edges of ruin, supporting neighbors who barter their last battery for a share of water. We live in a world remade by extremes, I say. Our fate rides on adaptation and collaboration. No single distiller will save us. No solitary genius will reverse the tides. But together, one rebuild site at a time, we can stitch a new tapestry across these broken lands. Sometimes the replies come in scratched transmissions, coordinates for a lost pump buried in the dune's guts, a plea for medicine from a settlement, cut off by collapsed bridges, a child's voice singing a lullaby learned from static-soaked tapes. Each voice reminds me why I began this broadcast, not to chart data or claim discoveries, but to give people a reason to turn the crank on, their own generators, to look for the next patch of green in the dust. And yet, my heart carries scars deeper than any desert trench. I still hear Jay's laughter when the sea was young and obedient, still feel the hollow where her absence coils in my chest. At night, beneath a sky mottled with ash and stars, I uncap a vial of deep sea water I saved from the Mariana Lab crystalline, brimming with life that once was. I sip it like communion, a silent prayer that I honor the past by forging the future. Nature itself remains wounded. The slowed currents creep cold and sluggish. Thermal upwellings choke coastal reefs with heat. Polar ice continues to drain into the sea beyond our reach. The jet stream has not forgiven us, swinging between frigid tsunamis and tropical infernos. But in hidden coves and black sand beaches, I've watched new mangrove shoots crack through toxins, witnessed plankton blooms of phosphorescent green flicker like dying embers, promising rekindled light. Life is stubborn. It adapts, resists, and sometimes, against all odds, flourishes. My final message tonight is simple. Stay alive, stay curious, stay connected. Fight for each sunrise as though it were your first. Tend to your makeshift gardens as though they hold the seeds of tomorrow. Share your innovations as though they were the last words before silence. If your radios stumble into static, call back with your hands and your laughter until the airwaves find you again. If raiders come, greet them with water first. Sometimes mercy breaks the cycle of violence. If despair creeps in, remember that even a single droplet can carve a canyon over centuries. This broadcast may be my last, or it may crackle through the ether long after I am gone. I cannot promise victory, only persistence. The tides may continue to slow, the storms to rage, and the world to fracture further. But as long as there is breath in our lungs and spark in our circuitry, we hold a chance thread of resistance woven through every act of rebuilding. Tomorrow, I will rise before the copper dawn, load the dune buggy with filter cartridges and barley seeds, and head for the next settlement. And as I pedal, I will carry with me the echo of every voice I've recorded, voices of fear, voices of joy, voices that remind me we are more than survivors. We are architects of a new world. So, stay with me wherever you are. Tune your dish to the frequencies I leave behind. Let our shared stories be the lighthouse guiding us through the longest night. The world may be broken, but the human spirit is not. And as long as we keep breathing, we keep fighting. We keep building hope, one drop, one seed, one broadcast at a time.